Visiting with us. We are honored that you're here and excited that you came and joined us this morning. You know, historically, we study together through series, and we, connect and connect ideas one week to another, and they build off each other, and we love kind of looking through things that way. But today we're going to do things a little bit different. If you're visiting with us, we're going to do a one-off today, where we're going to simply look at a title, "In Everything Give Thanks." You know, we're heading into Thanksgiving week, where most of us gather together with family and we start to think about what we're thankful for. It's already been referenced multiple times in worship this morning. Next Wednesday night, we're going to do a prayer, scripture, song service to continue with this idea. So this morning's goal is really simple. I want us to look through Scripture and look at what it means to be thankful. You know, we think about the things God blessed us with, and I don't want us to ever feel a sense of guilt for that. But I do also want us to have a proper understanding of where do our blessings come from, right? We can look at the things we're thankful for. We can count our blessings, as the song says. But as long as we're referencing where do they come from, why is God giving me this, we can have a proper understanding of gratitude and thankfulness, and look at what we have. You know, we look and we think about, why is thankfulness important? And this is as big as I could get up on the screen, but you think about the question, why study gratitude? Why be thankful? Why does it even matter? And there's every now and then there are things that the world thinks that they've found for the first time, but really God has been pointing us to all along. About 5 years ago, a paper was published. This was done through Harvard, and then it was republished through University of California at Berkeley. And so some pretty well-known institutes where people did their whole doctoral dissertation on the connection between health and gratitude. And this is a paper published, an academic paper. And if you can read that, it says gratitude and well-being, the benefits of appreciation. And these people did years of research connecting if we're grateful. Now again, there was really no spiritual slant to this, but they were looking at it from an earthly perspective of what happens if we're grateful? What happens if we're thankful? Does it change the way we interpret life? Does it change our body? Does it change our mind? And I hope you're not shocked to learn that the answer was yes. There was a resounding, there's something different that happens when we're that way. And the doctors, was actually a husband and wife team that they're MDs and PhDs, really overachievers, but they did this paper together, and they found that people that were grateful. Now again, as David did a fantastic job in his class this morning, some stuff like this is subjective, right? And so without diving all through the metrics of what constitutes better, we'll just suffice it to say that they saw improvement from where they started, but they reported better sleep. Over the course of the 8 years that they did this study, the people that were more grateful had fewer heart attacks, had fewer heart issues, heart failures, open heart surgeries. They had lower blood pressure. They had fewer aches and pains. This list, they had a whole page in their paper listing off the statistically significant things that they found that you and I benefit from when we're grateful. And of course, they presented this as, oh my heavens, look what we found. If we're thankful, if we're grateful, life gets a little easier. Life gets a little bit better. And I'm glad it's getting the attention that it deserves, but Paul talked about this to the church at Thessalonica 2,000 years ago, right? The Psalms are full of this kind of idea of, if we're thankful, this is part of God's plan for us. Being thankful, being grateful is part of being a follower of Him. Right? If we look at gratefulness, if we look at thankfulness, and we think, this is a bonus thing that we might be able to participate in, then we're missing the point. This is part of following Christ. 1 Thessalonians 5, 16 through 18. Rejoice always, pray without ceasing, in everything give thanks. For this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. We look at the first part of this verse a lot. Rejoice always, pray without ceasing. That may be a verse that you could quote instantly. But we keep going down into this, in everything give thanks. Sometimes we even go that far, but we stop it right there. But we keep reading into this, and we recognize this is the will of God, right? We spend days, weeks, months constantly thinking about, how do we emulate Christ better? How can I better understand and follow God and His will for me? And there's one sliver of this that's been laid out for us blatantly in 1 Thessalonians, and we miss right over it. Gratitude and thankfulness is part of God's plan for your life and for mine. Please don't think that this is something that we focus on one day a year. Please don't focus on it one day a year. But in fact, we put extra emphasis now, but in fact, this is something that we engage with day in and day out. It's good for us. This is part of the way God plans for us. I started looking into this, and there's a guy by the name of Dr. Austin Miller Riley, who he's English, but he started talking about in a commentary the connection between gratitude and the uphill fight that a lot of us face. And I read this and I thought, man, this is convicting. This is the way I think a lot of us fight with the idea of being grateful. He says, I've seen that if I am not ceaselessly vigilant, and I thought, man, that really is it. Ceaselessly vigilant about rejecting ingratitude and choosing gratitude, I all too easily get sucked into the undertow of life in a fallen world. I start focusing on what I don't have, what I want, or what I want that I don't have. My life starts to feel hard, wearisome, and overwhelming. And I thought, that's so true. Most of us struggle to some degree. We allow anxiety, we allow worry to get in our life. We stress about these things. And he's suggesting that the antidote to this, the antidote to worry, to anxiety, to fear, is actually gratitude. It's actually thankfulness for what we have, what God has blessed us with. And I thought, man, what a powerful correlation. He goes on to say that a lack of gratitude manifests itself in fretting, complaining, resenting. Even in the most turbulent waters, choosing gratitude rescues me, and I love this line, from myself and my runaway emotions. I mean, this describes certainly me, and maybe you can empathize as well. My runaway emotions, it buoys me on the grace of God. I wonder how our attitudes would change if we looked up every biblical reference to thanksgiving and gratitude and took them seriously. If bitterness is present in our life, it's a strong indication that thankfulness is absent. It's this connection between, and again, I want to start here to just lay the foundation for gratitude is essential. Thankfulness is essential. It benefits your mind, it benefits your body, but friends, it benefits your soul and your spirit. It's part of God's desire for you and me to be thankful. Not one day a year, but every single day we wake up and we're thankful for what God has given to us. So we're going to look at three truths surrounding thankfulness. These are not world-changing. They are world-changing, but you've heard them before. They're not new. But I want us to refocus our mind. Again, this is not a series. This is not going to come up next week. I want us to spend every ounce of our energy today honing in on what it means to be thankful. There's physical benefits, there's mental benefits, there's spiritual benefits most of all. We start by looking at Christ gave us an example of thankfulness. We look through the life of Christ, and we do this so often. We look through the Gospels, we look through the counts of Christ, and we look at the way he interacted, the way he lived life. Recognize that this is God incarnate. This is God on earth that is going about his daily walk and spends time being thankful to the Father. You know, again, we could spend a lot of time looking at this, but I came up with just a few kind of areas where Christ gave thanks. And this might seem arbitrary, but I want to start here. Christ gave thanks for food over meals. You know, we look, and again, we could read this, but it would take too long. I want to look at three spots, though. You know the story of when Christ, he broke 5 loaves, 2 fish, and he fed 5,000. This is a story in 3 of the 4 Gospels. He gave thanks over that meal. When that process was happening, he thanked the Father for provisions. When Christ bowed his head at the Last Supper, we're going to look at that later, he gave thanks. Knowing what was coming, knowing the torture, the death, the crucifixion that he was about to go through, he gave thanks. He said, Father, thank you. Bless this meal that we're about to partake in, knowing what it's going to represent. When he was asked to go to dinner with the disciples on the road to Emmaus, he stopped and he gave thanks. Again, you might think that praying over a meal is arbitrary. You might think it's simple. You might think it's too elementary. But I started thinking through this, and I recognized that the creator of all sustenance, God incarnate on earth, gave thanks for simple provisions. Why shouldn't you and me? Christ was there in the beginning. We look back at the Genesis account of the creation of the universe. We know that Jesus, God the Son, was present when it was all created. Christ looked around him and saw the fish that he was multiplying, the meal that was being prepared. And in a very literal sense, he created it all. He was there in all of it, but yet found some spiritual value in going to the Father and thanking him anyway. Friends, if Jesus can look at a meal and say, I'm so grateful to be fed today that I need to pray to the Father and thank him for that, then how much more so should we engage in that same process? He was thankful for meals, as simple as it might be. Jesus gave thanks when his prayers were answered. And again, this might seem simple, but really start going into the weeds of what this really meant. Again, he is God on earth. Right, he did miracles. He could do a whole lot more than he ever did. But when things were answered, he still recognized, now partly this was for those looking on. This was for their benefit. But recognized that he felt some sense of spiritual benefit of going to the Father. I think about when Lazarus came back from the dead. He stood before the stone. We're going to look at this verse in a moment. And he said, Lord, thank you for hearing my prayer. This is very clearly the man, Jesus, that's recognizing I'm praying to my Father. Even though in a very real sense he is God. But the man part of him that most closely connects him to us is saying, Lord, thank you for hearing my prayer. John 11 and verse 41, they took away the stone. This is right when, again, Lazarus was a close friend of Jesus. And Jesus, wasn't there when he passed away, and his family was frustrated by that. Jesus had a grander plan, and in John 11:41, they took away the stone, and Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you. You have heard me. He was thankful for heard prayers. He's thankful for answered prayers. Friends, do you and I have the same thing? Again, all of this seems simple. It seems elementary, and that's kind of the point. Thankfulness is not a complex subject, but it is one that's difficult to execute, to do it regularly, and that's what Jesus did perfectly. He took these very simple things that we oftentimes overlook, meals, heard prayers, and we have a whole lot more than just that to be thankful for, but very seldomly do we list this off to the Father. That's what we're hoping to accomplish today. That's what we're hoping to accomplish Wednesday night when we engage in that exercise. But friends, can it be more than that? Can we engage in this more often? Jesus gave thanks for the provision of God in the midst of suffering. In the midst of some of his darkest, worst days on earth, he went to the Father and thanked him for the provisions that God had blessed him with. If you look in Matthew chapter 26, we'll read a few verses together. Matthew 26, and again, this is the Last Supper. This is when Jesus knew that he was about to depart and go and be crucified and then put into the tomb and would rise again. And he recognized the finality of what is going on here. He recognized the need to impart some wisdom onto those that were eating with him and knew the significance of what would become of the Lord's Supper, things that we've already memorialized this morning. But Jesus says this in Matthew 26 through 29. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take, eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup when he had given thanks. He gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is the blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it with you anew in my Father's kingdom." When he's breaking the bread and he's drinking the cup, knowing what this is representing, his body, his blood, that's ultimately going to be broken. But he gives thanks and he says, "Lord, thank you for your provision in the midst of the suffering." Friends, even when you and I go through these seasons of suffering, and we do. Some of you are there now, some of you have been there recently, some of us will get there very soon. We go through these periods. Do we still go to God and say, "Lord, thank you. Thank you for sustaining me in the midst of the storm"? I think about Peter walking out. Thank you for keeping me above the water, right? And I think about the imagery of Peter going out on the water because the success of that endeavor was ultimately on Peter. Christ was he was ready. He said, "Come out. You're able to walk." And Peter did walk as long as the faith sustained him. When he began to recognize the wind and the waves, that's when he sank. You and I are the exact same way. God is ready to be with us as long as we're ready to do our part as well. We look at examples like this. Christ gave thanks. Christ gives us an example of thankfulness. And thankfulness also cultivates. It cultivates a lot of things within us that you may not even think about. Thankfulness cultivates contentment, among other things. Philippians 4, if you've been with us for a while, you know we've just been in a series looking through Philippians. And Philippians 4, 11 through 12 is a beautiful example of Paul really articulating what it means to be content, right? To be thankful for what we have in the circumstance that we have it. I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstance. I know what it is like to be in need, and I know what it is like to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. I think that may be the linchpin of this whole thing. Whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. You know, you think back through your life, and most of us can empathize with this to a degree. You know, we think about life, and it's a series of ups and downs. There's highs and there's lows, and the truth is, what do we do about it? Right? Not are we going to react at a high, or are we going to react at a low, but moreover, are we going to prepare ahead of time so that when we're in the highs and when we're in the lows, we're equally grateful for God, for what he's given through us in those moments, the journey to get us there, the journey to get us out of there. All of that is part of his plan. And that's really all of what Paul is pointing to here. He says, I know what it's like to have a lot. I know what it's like to have a little, but through all of this, God sustains me. That's the idea of contentment. And I think thankfulness cultivates that. Thankfulness also cultivates confidence. You know, when you and I go to the Father and are thankful, we look in Romans chapter 8. This is another letter Paul wrote back to the church at Rome. And in chapter 8, verse 28, he says, and we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have called according to his purpose. This is that idea of everything that God does for us is all connected to part of his plan for you and me. Friends, that should give you confidence. Being thankful for God's plan, confidence is a byproduct. When you and I go before the Father and we kneel and we say, Lord, thank you for your plan. Thank you for your will. Even though it's not always perfect, not always easy, but thank you for your plan that you've given to me. It gives us confidence knowing that God is there. He's guiding us. He knows where we're headed. Thankfulness cultivates confidence. And then lastly, and this is kind of where I want to, again, this is not a complex lesson, but it is one that I want to encourage us to execute on. Thankfulness celebrates. Thankfulness celebrates. And really, this is, I think, the probably the closest representation of what most of us will be doing this upcoming week. Right? We think about the things we're thankful for. We talk about that with family. And I want to encourage you to go through this exercise. But it's really the celebration phase that we most think about, and we think about us and associate with Thanksgiving. But again, do we recognize before all of that, Christ gave us the example for Thanksgiving, and Christ guides us in this attitude of Thanksgiving. It cultivates things within us, and it also celebrates. Let's read together Psalm 107. Psalm 107. Now, this is another psalm of David. David is a really interesting character study, and Steve Beals has done a fantastic job on Sunday night guiding us through some of the Psalms. Of course, not all of them, but some of them. And if you just throw a dart in Psalms, you're more likely to hit a Psalm of David than just about anybody else. David is a perfect representation of that cyclical up and down kind of pattern that life shows to you and me. David felt it, you feel it, I feel it. And this is one of those kind of high points where things begin to go right, and Israel is following after God. And David writes this psalm, and I wish we had time to read all 43 verses, but we don't. But I would like to read the first 8, and I want to encourage you. Sometimes, sitting around Thanksgiving table, we think about the things we're thankful for. We offer a prayer for those kinds of things. I'd encourage you to think about Psalm 107 in that same light. Because this is really, David is kind of sitting around a table, so to speak, and laying out all the ways that he's thankful for God's provision and what God has done for him. Listen to what he says, Psalm 107, 1 through 8. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. Friends, we could stop right there, and it would be enough. But he goes on. He keeps going. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so, whom he has redeemed from trouble and gathered in the lands from the east and the west, from the north and from the south. Some wandered in desert wastes, finding no way to a city to dwell in. Hungry and thirsty, their soul fainted within them. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He led them by a straight way till they reached a city to dwell in. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man. This is 8 verses of a much longer psalm, and David really eloquently, very beautifully lays out all the things that God has done. He satisfies the longing soul, the hungry soul. He fills with good things. He talks about all the ways that he has blessed mankind. But I love 1 through 8 because it so closely models our story. Right? David is describing, he says, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good." But then he starts describing someone that's wandering in a desert, not able to find anywhere to find shelter. Right? In verse 4, some have wandered in desert wastes, finding no way to a city to dwell in. Friends, when you think about your life before Christ, does that not very closely emulate? Certainly it does for me. I think about my life prior to coming to know Christ, and it very much felt that way. Right? Wandering in a desert, not finding anywhere to find shelter. Feeling alone, feeling vulnerable. And then finding the Father that's able to guide me. He led me by straight ways till they reached a city to dwell in. And then in 8, he's laying this out as really a reaction to that blessing. In verse 8, he says, "Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works for the children of man." I love this because, again, this is my story. Maybe this is yours as well. We've been wandering, and God guides us into that city, into that shelter, and provides for our needs. It's very much what he did through sending us Jesus. Right? We were wandering, and he sent us Christ to be that shelter that we're able to access. We're able to go into that through his blood, through his body that was shed on the cross. Again, we think about this idea of thankfulness, and I want to encourage us this week to engage in these exercises. Think about what you're thankful for. Articulate what you're thankful for. Talk about it with friends, with family. It's a positive thing. Again, science is just now catching up to what God has laid out from the very beginning. It's good for your body. It's good for your mind. It's good for your soul. How thankful are we? Gilbert in his opening prayer this morning began to lay out, and he said there's so much more that we could pray and that we should be thankful for, and he's absolutely right. We could spend our entire time together this morning, tonight, Wednesday night, just saying and talking about all the things that we have to be thankful for, and we'd run out. We'd run out of time. That's how much God has blessed us with, but so seldomly do we take the time to properly thank him. That's what I want to challenge you with today. How thankful are we? We have a lot to be thankful for. And now we have an opportunity to let our Father in heaven know how grateful we are for him. That he ultimately sent us Jesus. In everything, give thanks. The highs, the lows, the times when we're joyful, the times when we're sorrowful. In all things, give thanks to the Father. This morning, if you're not a Christian, what a great opportunity to make that choice to come to the Father that's just described in Psalm 107. Maybe you feel like you've been wandering, right? Wandering in the desert, trying to find that shelter, trying to find the straight way, trying to find the straight path to guide you into shelter. Friends, Christ is that answer. He is that shelter. He is that straight path. David knew that thousands and thousands of years ago, and we see that still today. If that's your need this morning, would you come let us know about it? If you just need prayers or support, we'd love to help you with that as well. If we can do anything for you, would you come let us know about it as we stand and as we sing?